One of the most impactful books I've ever read on my spiritual life is a book called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard, which is a diary reflection of a year of her living out in a Virginia rural area and the nature and what she learns from nature and about herself as she does that. Um, my copy, of course, my copy's been given away and lost many times. My original copy was the original edition published in the United Kingdom, which had an incredible preface by Richard Adams, the author of Watership Down. And in it he tries to explain the difference between British understanding of nature and wilderness and an American understanding. And he points out that in Britain, wilderness is a place of peace, a place you go for picnics, a place fairly safe. But for Americans, the wilderness is a dangerous place, a place where you are in danger from physical attack from animals and other things, that you are a distance from civilization, and that there are still creatures that can attack you. And as someone who has spent the last 15 years living with coyotes and alligators in the back garden and other creatures like that, you understand that you do have to be careful in the wilderness in the United States, because even in your back garden, there can be red ants that will bite you and could actually potentially kill you. Very rarely does it happen, but could do them, but will give you very, very painful bites that will last for days. And I think the difference is that in Britain, we don't really have a wild in that sense, maybe on top of a few of our mountains and hills where you're isolated and at risk. But for the most part, whatever happens to you, there is help within a short distance, which is not true of the United States. When you do first aid, normally you're being trained to stabilize and protect a person who's been injured until the professionals arrive, which we assume will be a fairly short time. But if you're going to go explore the wilderness in the United States, you need to do further training, because help could be hours or days away. And your first aid training needs to be very different, because you might have to make much more serious decisions about the injuries a person has. And literally there are large parts of the United States where if you run into trouble or walking or whatever activity you're doing, it can be days before help can get to you. And if you can't send for help, you will die out there. In the American Scouts, they have a place called Philmont in New Mexico, which is a great big outdoor place where you go walking for days on end. And once you leave base camp, you probably will not see many groups in your 2 weeks you are walking. And regularly, once every 10 years or so, someone dies there. They fall a cliff, they get injured, something happens, and help can't get to them quick enough, and they die. And of course, that's sad, but it's part of the experience that you are taught that you can survive this, and there is a danger. It's real, and you do need to do it properly. When I talk about Philmont to parents of younger scouts, it was always a bit of shock that their son could die if they went on this trip. But I pointed out they were more likely to die in a car crash or be run over by a car than they would to die at Philmont. The risk was much greater giving them the keys to the car when they turned 16 than it was letting them go to Philmont. So the wilderness is seen as a dangerous place. The wilderness is the place outside of civilization. It's where we don't have electricity, where we don't have police, we don't have the fire brigade, we don't have hospitals and doctors. It is a place where we have to face danger with whoever we're with or alone. We don't have that support we've grown used to. It's a place without supermarkets and shops, where if we want food, we either have to carry it in or we have to get it somehow there. Either gather it or kill it. It's a place very different to us who are used to civilization. And for the Jewish people, in the Old Testament particularly, the wilderness was two places. One where they were sent because God had sent them out because of their misbehavior. That's what in some ways Exodus is about. They had come from liberation. God had hoped to bring them quickly to the promised land. Because of their rebellion and their refusal to understand who he was, they had to wander 40 years in the wilderness. It's also once Israel is settled, God describes their cities and their towns and their farms become wilderness because of the rejection of his ways. So wilderness is a fearful punishment because of the realization that you lose your support and it's a place of danger. And for many of us, the last year has been that sort of wilderness. We've lived in a place of fear of illness. Even if we survive the illness, we know that many people have, although thankfully only a small percentage, but people have long-term, perhaps lifelong effects of the illness. And we're afraid that we might be struck and either suffer lifelong effects or death. We're also afraid of those we might lose, particularly our older relatives. We're afraid of the economic impact. Might we lose our job, our home, our business? Might the economy be seriously affected and we will, all of us, suffer because of it? We've suffered from mental health issues as we've been isolated or stuck with people and had to deal with difficult relationships. Or we've been isolated and not been able to see anyone. We've been fearful of the future, the unknown. We've also found it difficult because we don't know how long this will go on and what the end will look like and what the world will be once things return to quote unquote normal. So that aspect, that negative aspect, that fearful aspect, that being stripped and fear and being exposed to who you are aspect of the wilderness is one many of us have experienced. So how do we respond to this? How do we deal with this aspect of the wilderness? Well, the first thing I think is to be realistic. It really is happening. The wilderness is a place of danger. And some of us will lose our jobs. Some of us will lose our businesses and our homes. And the world for many of us will be very different when this is all over. Some of us will continue to mourn those we have lost and weren't able to mourn properly. Some of us will have lingering results of this illness that will carry through our lifetime. So we must be realistic that we really are in a difficult place, a dangerous place, and accept it, and not just think it's a fantasy and dismiss it, saying that we're just something wrong with us. Secondly, for those of us who have been affected less, some of us perhaps even have benefited from this. If we've worked for the right company that has seen increased business and increased profits, perhaps our pay has gone up. For many of us, if we work from home, we have saved significant amount of money, or because we haven't been to go on holiday or spend our money on other things, we have seen our personal savings increase. For those of us, we must be aware of those who are not as lucky as us and those who have suffered. And we must make sure that we don't fall into selfishness saying we've benefited, too bad about those who haven't. We must make sure that the recovery includes means of helping those who have suffered to recover as best as we can. In aspects of employment, in aspects of personal finance, and if they are been disabled by this disease, that the health care and support is there to allow them to live as full a life as possible. So we can't just see our own lives in terms of what we have benefited from, but we must also be aware of those who are in need. The third aspect is that this will come to an end. We will leave the wilderness at some point. And we will return to something like normal life. So there is an end to this. This will not go on forever. And there is hope at the end. We must hold on to that hope and cherish that hope. But lastly, I think the most important thing is we must reflect on what this experience has been, about just how fragile life is, how important it is. What will we learn that we have lost that we didn't actually need? What have we lost that we actually need and need to be replaced? We need to be able to learn from this experience, to reflect upon it, and to grow through it. This does not mean this aspect of the wilderness experience is good. It just means that we must learn from things that are not always good. We must try to grow through things that are negative. So this has been a difficult time, but it's where we really are. And if we don't learn from it, we have wasted an opportunity.